Hello. Welcome to Storytime with Moog. I am Moog, and today we are starting a new book, The Man Who Laughs by Victor Hugo. But first, all right, reading updates, I guess. I am reading Dune Messiah, as picked by chat. It is the second in the series. The first six were actually written by Frank Herbert before it was taken over by his son, and liking it so far. I thought it would be really hard to get into because it's been like a couple years since I read the first one, but the recap is done really well and creatively, and I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. Also, I feel like this is a bit of a faster read than the first one. I'm on page 68, and yeah, there's like 330 pages, something like that. So, enjoying it. And then I went to the library, nobody surprised, and I picked up Before the Coffee Gets Cold, which is a series of like vignettes, but they all take place in this coffee house, which is like a fancy coffee house. In that, if you sit at this particular table, you can sort of travel back in time and have coffee with somebody from your past. And your meeting only lasts until the end of your coffee. So I'm really excited to see how this goes. I've heard really good things, and this is the first one. I think there's 3 books now, something like that. But the cover says, "What would you change if you could travel back in time?" Which is always a really cool thing. It's called Before the Coffee Gets Cold. Sorry for the glare. It is by, oh no, Toshikazu Kawaguchi. But yeah, I'm excited. And I know it's going to make me sad because one of them I think is an autism story or not autism, Alzheimer's story. And I'm just going to be upset because that's just how it goes. I also picked up Learned by Heart only because it's written by Emma Donoghue. And I had never even heard of this. It's a new book. It came out this year. Like super recently, I think. I don't know. It was in the news section. Yeah, it came out in August of 2023. And it just says, drawing on years of investigation as well as Anne Lister's 5 million word secret journal, Learned by the Heart is the long buried love story of Eliza Rain, an orphaned heiress banished from India to England at age 6, and Anne Lister, a brilliant, troublesome tomboy who meet at the Manor House for Young Ladies in New York in 1805 when they are both 14. Emotionally intense, psychologically compelling, and deeply researched, Learned by Heart is an extraordinary work of fiction by one of the world's greatest storytellers. In a shattering portrait of first love and loss, the tangled lives of Anne Lister and Eliza Rain form a tale for the ages. So that's something really cool about Emma Donoghue, is that she writes fiction, but it's all based on events that have actually happened, and she just sort of extrapolates it. It's kind of like a what if. But today we're starting a new book, The Man Who Laughs, which is the inspiration for the Joker, and I'm so excited because guess what? There will be Joker cosplays. I say this very confidently, unknowing how future Moog is going to unknowing how future Moog is going to be. Okay. So, I figured that I would be like a good streamer and like look up some background information on this book instead of just being like every other book that we've read here and just being thrown into it without any context. So I pulled up Wikipedia. I did so much research. And I just want to read just a couple snippets just to like give more context to like what's going on. Um okay, so The Man Who Laughs, which is also published under the title By Order of the King, is a novel by Victor Hugo, originally published in 1869. Nice. Under the French title L'Homme qui rit. That is not how you pronounce that, but that's fine. It takes place in England beginning in 1690 and extends into the early 18th century reign of Queen Anne. It depicts England's royalty and aristocracy of the time as cruel and power hungry. Hugo intended parallels with the France of Louis Philippe and the Regency. And then a tiny bit of background. Hugo wrote this story over a period of 15 months while he was living in the Channel Islands, having been exiled from his native France because of the controversial political content of his previous novels, a la Hunchback of Notre Dame, a la Les Miserables. Hugo's working title for this book was By Order of the King. Despite an initially negative reception upon publication, The Man Who Laughs is argued to be one of Hugo's greatest works. Making a parallel between the mutilation of one man and of human experience, Hugo touches on a recurrent theme in his work, La misère, and criticizes both the nobility which in boredom results to violence and oppression and the passivity of the people who submit to it and prefer laughter to struggle. So just some super light reading, no big deal. It's gonna be super fun, super light. Oh, and also this book is written in 2 different parts. Not that that really changes anything, but so that we know. All right. Part 1. Book the first. Night not so black as man. Skipping through the chapter names. There's a lot of chapter names. Here we go. Preliminary chapter. Ursus. 1. Ursus and Homo were fast friends. Ursus was a man. Homo was a wolf. Their dispositions tallied. It was the man who had christened the wolf. Probably he had also chosen his own name. Having found Ursus fit for himself, he had found Homo fit for the beast. Man and wolf turned their partnership to account at fairs, at village fetes, at the corners of streets where passers-by throng, and out of the need which people seem to feel everywhere to listen to idle gossip and to buy quack medicine. The wolf, gentle and courteously subordinate, diverted the crowd. It is a pleasant thing to behold the tameness of animals. Our greatest delight is to see all the varieties of domestication parade before us. This it is which collects so many folks on the road of royal processions. Ursus and Homo went about from crossroad to crossroad, from the high street of Aberystwyth to the high street of Jedburgh, from shire to shire, from town to town. One market exhausted, they went on to another. Ursus lived in a small van upon wheels, which Homo was civilized enough to draw by day and guard by night. On bad roads, uphill, and where there were too many ruts or there was too much mud, the man buckled the trace round his neck and pulled fraternally, side by side with the wolf. They had thus grown old together. They encamped at haphazard on a common, in the glade of a wood, on the waste patch of grass where roads intersect, at the outskirts of villages, at the gates of towns, in marketplaces, in public walks, on the borders of parks, before the entrances of churches. When the cart drew up on a fair green, when the gossips ran up open-mouthed, and the curious made a circle round the pair, Ursus harangued, and Homo approved. Homo, with a bowl in his mouth, politely made a collection among the audience. They gained their livelihood. The wolf was lettered, likewise, the man. The wolf had been trained by the man, or had trained himself, unassisted, to divers wolfish arts, which swelled the receipts. Above all things, do not degenerate into a man, his friend would say to him. Never did the wolf bite. The man did now and then. At least, to bite was the intent of Ursus. He was a misanthrope. And to italicize his misanthropy, he had made himself a juggler. To live, also, for the stomach has to be consulted. Moreover, this juggler misanthrope, whether to add to the complexity of his being or to perfect it, was a doctor. To be a doctor is little. Ursus was a ventriloquist. You heard him speak without his moving his lips. He counterfeited, so as to deceive you, anyone's accent or pronunciation. He imitated voices so exactly that you believed you heard the people themselves. All alone he simulated the murmur of a crowd, and this gave him a right to the title of some really big word, Ingastromythos, which he took. He reproduced all sorts of cries of birds, as of the thrush, the wren, the pipit lark, otherwise called the gray cheeper, and the ring ousel, all travelers like himself, so that at times when the fancy struck him, he made you aware either of a public thoroughfare filled with the uproar of men, or of a meadow loud with the voices of beasts. At one time stormy was a multitude, at another fresh and serene as the dawn. Such gifts, although rare, exist. In the last century a man called Tozol, who imitated the mingled utterances of men and animals, and who counterfeited all the cries of beasts, was attached to the person of Buffon, who served as a menagerie. Ursus was sagacious, contradictory, odd, and inclined to the singular expositions which we termed fables. He had the appearance of believing in them, and this imprudence was a part of his humor. He read people's hands, opened books at random and drew conclusions, told fortunes, taught that it is perilous to meet a black mare, still more perilous, as you start for a journey, to hear yourself accosted by one who knows not whither you are going, and he called himself a dealer in superstitions. He used to say, "There is a difference between me and the Archbishop of Canterbury. I avow what I am." Hence it was that the Archbishop, justly indignant, had him one day before him. But Ursus cleverly disarmed his grace by reciting a sermon he had composed upon Christmas Day, which the delighted Archbishop learnt by heart and delivered from the pulpit as his own. In consideration thereof, the Archbishop pardoned Ursus. As a doctor, Ursus wrought cures by some means or other. He made use of aromatics. He was versed in simples. He made the most of the immense power which lies in a heap of neglected plants, such as the hazel, the catkin, the white alder, the white briony, the mealy tree, the traveller's joy, the buckthorn. He treated phthisis with the sundew. At opportune moments, he would use the leaves of the spurge, which plucked at the bottom are a purgative, and plucked at the top in emetic. Oh my gosh, I'm having such a silly time with this. He cured sore throat by means of the vegetable excrescence called... That is racist. I'm not going to say what it was called. He knew the rush which cures the ox and the mint which cures the horse. He was well acquainted with the beauties and virtues of the herb mandragora, which, as everyone knows, is of both sexes. He had many recipes. He cured burns with the salamander wool, of which, according to Pliny, Nero had a napkin. Ursus possessed a retort and a flask. He effected transmutations. He sold panaceas. It was said of him that he had once been, for a short time, in Bedlam. They had done him the honor to take him for a madman, but had set him free on discovering that he was only a poet. This story was probably not true. We have all to submit to some such legend about us. The fact is, Ursus was a bit of a savant, a man of taste, and an old Latin poet. He had learned in two forms. He hypocrisized and he pinderized. I am clearly not a bit of a savant or cultured at all. He could have vied in bombast with Vida. He could have composed Jesuit tragedies in a style not less triumphant than that of Father Bohor's. It followed from his familiarity with the venerable rhythms and meters of the ancients that he had peculiar figures of speech, and a whole family of classical metaphors. He would say of a mother followed by her two daughters, "There is a dactyl." Of a father preceded by his two sons, "There is an anapest." And of a little child walking between its grandmother and father, "There is an amphimacer." So much knowledge could only end in starvation. The school of Salerno says, "Eat little and often." Ursus ate little and seldom, thus obeying one half of the precept and disobeying the other. But this was the fault of the public, who did not always flock to him, and who did not often buy. Ursus was wont to say, "The expectoration of a sentence is a relief. The wolf is comforted by its howl, the sheep by its wool, the forest by its finch, woman by her love, and the philosopher by his epiphonema. Epiphonema. Something like that." Ursus, at a pinch, composed comedies, which, in recital, he all but acted. This helped to sell the drugs. Among other works, he had composed a heroic pastoral in honor of Sir Hugh Middleton, who in 1608 brought a river to London. The river was lying peacefully in Hertfordshire, 20 miles from London. The knight came and took possession of it. He brought a brigade of 600 men, armed with shovels and pickaxes, set to breaking up the ground, scooping it out in one place, raising it in another, now 30 feet high, now 20 feet deep, made wooden aqueducts high in air, and at different points constructed 800 bridges of stone, bricks, and timber. One fine morning the river entered London, which was short of water. Ursus transformed all these vulgar details into a fine eclogue between the Thames and the New River, in which the former invited the latter to come to him, and offered her his bed, saying, "I am too old to please women, but I am rich enough to pay for them," an ingenious and gallant conceit to indicate how Sir Hugh Middleton had completed the work at his own expense. Ursus was great in soliloquy. Of a disposition at once unsociable and talkative, desiring to see no one, yet wishing to converse with someone, he got out of the difficulty by talking to himself. Anyone who has lived a solitary life knows how deeply seated monologue is in one's nature. Speech imprisoned frets to find a vent. To harangue space is an outlet. To speak out aloud when alone is, as it were, to have a dialogue with the divinity which is within. It was, as is well known, a custom of Socrates. He declaimed to himself. Luther did the same. Ursus took after those great men. He had the faculty of being his own audience. He questioned himself, answered himself, praised himself, blamed himself. You heard him in the street soliloquizing in his van. The passers-by, who have their own way of appreciating clever people, used to say, "He's an idiot." As we have just observed, he abused himself at times, but there were times also when he rendered himself justice. One day, in one of these allocutions addressed to himself, he was heard to cry out, "I have studied vegetation in all its mysteries, in the stalk, in the bud, in the sepal, in the stamen, in the carpel, in the ovule, in the spore, in the theca, and in the apothecium. I have thoroughly sifted chromatics, osmosy, and chymosy, and is to say the formation of colors, of smell, and of taste." There was something fatuous, doubtless, in this certificate which Ursus gave to Ursus. But let those who have not thoroughly sifted chromatics, osmosy, and chymosy cast the first stone at him. Fortunately, Ursus had never gone into the Low Countries. Capital Low, capital Countries. There they would certainly have weighed him to ascertain whether he was of the normal weight, above or below which a man is a sorcerer. In Holland, this weight was sagely fixed by law. Nothing was simpler or more ingenious. It was a clear test. They put you in a scale, and the evidence was conclusive if you broke the equilibrium. Too heavy, you were hanged. Too light, you were burned. To this day, the scales in which sorcerers were weighed may be seen at Oudwater, but they are now used for weighing cheeses. How religion has degenerated. Ursus would certainly have had a crow to pluck with these scales. In his travel, he kept away from Holland, and he did well. Indeed, we believe that he used never to leave the United Kingdom. However, this may have been. He was very poor and morose, and having made the acquaintance of his wolf in the wood, a taste for a wandering life had come over him. He had taken the wolf into partnership, and with him had gone forth on the highways, living in the open air the great life of chance. He had a great deal of industry and of reserve, and great skill in everything connected with healing operations, restoring the sick to health, and in working wonders peculiar to himself. He was considered a clever mountebank and a good doctor. As may be imagined, he passed for a wizard as well. Not much, indeed, only a little, for it was unwholesome in those days to be considered a friend of the devil. To tell the truth, Ursus, by his passion for pharmacy and his love of plants, laid himself open to suspicion, seeing that he often went to gather herbs in rough thickets where grew Lucifer's salads, and where, as has been proved by the Chancellor de Locre, there is a risk of meeting in the evening mist a man who comes out of the earth, blind of the right eye, barefooted, without a cloak, and a sword by his side. But for the matter of that, Ursus, although eccentric in manner and disposition, was too good a fellow to invoke or disperse hail, to make faces appear, to kill a man with the torment of excessive dancing, to suggest dreams fair or foul and full of terror, and to cause the birth the birth of cocks with 4 wings. He had no such mischievous tricks. He was incapable of certain abominations, such as, for instance, speaking German, Hebrew, or Greek without having learned them, which is a sign of unpardonable wickedness, or of a natural infirmity proceeding from a morbid humor. If Ursus spoke Latin, it was because he knew it. He would never have allowed himself to speak Syriac, which he did not know. Besides, it is asserted that Syriac is the language spoken in the midnight meetings at which uncanny people worship the devil. In medicine, he justly preferred Galen to Cardan, Cardan, although a learned man, being but an earthworm to Galen. To sum up, Ursus was not one of those persons who live in fear of the police. His van was long enough and wide enough to allow for his lying down in it on a box containing his not very sumptuous apparel. He owned a lantern, several wigs, and some utensils suspended from nails, among which were musical instruments. He possessed, besides, a bearskin, with which he covered himself on his days of grand performance. He called this putting on full dress. He used to say, "I have two skins. This is the real one," pointing to the bearskin. The little house on wheels belongs to himself and to the wolf. Besides his house, his retort, and his wolf, he had a flute and a violoncello, on which he played prettily. He concocted his own elixirs. His wits yield him enough to sup on sometimes. In the top of his van was a hole, through which passed the pipe of a cast-iron stove, so close to his box as to scorch the wood of it. The stove had two compartments. In one of them Ursus cooked his chemicals, and in the other his potatoes. I see we have our priorities straight. This is my potato oven, and this is my chemicals oven. At night, the wolf slept under the van, amicably secured by a chain. The wolf's hair was black, that of Ursus, gray. Ursus was 50, unless indeed he was 60. He accepted his destiny, to such an extent that, as we have just seen, he ate potatoes, the trash on which at that time they fed pigs and convicts. He ate them indignant, but resigned. He was not tall, he was long, he was bent and melancholy. He bowed the bowed frame of an old man in the settlement in the architecture of life. Nature had formed him for sadness. He found it difficult to smile, and he had never been able to weep, so that he was deprived of the consolation of tears as well as the palliative of joy. An old man is a thinking ruin, and such a ruin was Ursus. He had the loquacity of a charlatan, the leanness of a prophet, the irascibility of a charged mine. Such was Ursus. In his youth he had been a philosopher in the house of a lord. This was 180 years ago, when men were more like wolves than they are now. Not so very much, though. End of one. All right, so first chapter is all about this guy who is super smart, but also like not really part of like society, definitely not high society, and he walks the line of madman and genius and poet, and also toys with the line of being outside the law and doing like mischievous things with plants and chemicals and like being a legit doctor. So he's just like in and out of this world. He's walking in all the worlds right now. So yeah, and our friend Ursus has a wolf, which is kind of cool. I want a wolf. A dire wolf? Ooh, sign me up for that. All right. 2. Hummel was no ordinary wolf. From his appetite for medlars and potatoes, he might have been taken for a prairie wolf. From his dark hide, for a lycaon, and from his howl prolonged into a bark, for a dog of Chile. But no one has as yet observed the eyeball of a dog of Chile sufficiently to enable us to determine whether he be not a fox, and Homo was a real wolf. He was 5 feet long, which is a fine length for a wolf, even in Lithuania. He was very strong. He looked at you askance, which was not his fault. He had a soft tongue with which he occasionally licked Ursus. He had a narrow brush of short bristles on his backbone, and he was lean with the wholesome leanness of a forest life. Before he knew Ursus and had a carriage to draw, he thought nothing of doing his 50 miles a night. Ursus, meeting him in a thicket near a stream of running water, had convinced high opinion of him from seeing the skill and sagacity with which he fisted out crayfish, and welcomed him as an honest and genuine Kopara wolf of the kind called crab-eater. As a beast of burden, Ursus preferred Homo to a donkey. He would have felt repugnance to having his hut drawn by an ass. He thought too highly of the ass for that. Moreover, he had observed that the ass, a four-legged thinker, little understood by men, has a habit of cocking his ears uneasily when philosophers talk nonsense. In life, the ass is a third person between our thoughts and ourselves, and acts as a restraint, as a friend. Ursus preferred Homo to a dog, considering that the love of a wolf is more rare. Hence it was that the wolf sufficed for Ursus. Homo was for Ursus more than a companion, he was an analogue. Ursus used to pat the wolf's empty ribs, saying, "I have found the second volume of myself." Again he said, "When I am dead, anyone wishing to know me need only study Homo. I shall leave a true copy behind me." The English law, not very lenient to beasts of the forest, might have picked a quarrel with the wolf, and have put him to trouble for his assurance in going freely from the towns. But Homo took advantage of the immunity granted by a statute of Edward IV to servants. Every servant in attendance on his master is free to come and go. Besides, a certain relaxation of the law had resulted with regard to wolves, in consequence of its being the fashion of the ladies of the court, under the later Stuarts, to have, instead of dogs, little wolves, called adives, about the size of cats, which were brought from Asia at a great cost. So it's totally cool to have wolves now because the royals want wolves. So, like, whatever. It's fine. Ursus had communicated to Homo a portion of his talents, such as to stand upright, to restrain his rage into sulkiness, to howl, to growl instead of howling, etc. And on his part, the wolf had taught the man what he knew, to do without a roof, without bread and fire, to prefer hunger in the woods to slavery in a palace. The van, hut, and vehicle in one, which traversed so many different roads, without, however, leaving Great Britain, had 4 wheels, with shafts for the wolf and a splinter bar for the man. The splinter bar came into use when the roads were bad. The van was strong, although it was built of light boards like a dovecot. In front there was a glass door, with a little balcony used for orations, which had something of the character of the platform tempered by an air of the pulpit. At the back there was a door with a practicable panel. By lowering the 3 steps which turned on a hinge below the door, access was gained to the hut, which at night was securely fastened with bolt and lock. Rain and snow had fallen plentifully on it. It had been painted, but of what color it was difficult to say, change of season being to vans what changes of rain are to courtiers. In front, outside, was a board, a kind of frontispiece. on which the following inscription might once have been deciphered. It was in black letters on a white ground, but by degrees the characters had become confused and blurred. By friction, gold loses every year a 14/100th part of its bulk. This is what is called the wear. Hence, it follows that on 1,400 millions of gold in circulation throughout the world, 1 million is lost annually. This million dissolves into dust, flies away, floats about, is reduced to atoms, charges, drugs, weighs down consciences, amalgamates with the souls of the rich, who it renders proud, and with those of the poor, whom it renders brutish. The inscription, rubbed and blotted by the rain and by the kindness of nature, was fortunately illegible, for it is possible that its philosophy concerning the inhalation of gold, at the same time both enigmatical and lucid, might not have been to the taste of the sheriffs, the provost marshals, and other bigwigs of the law. English legislation did not trifle in those days. It did not take much to make a man a felon. The magistrates were ferocious by tradition, and cruelty was a matter of routine. The judges of assize increased and multiplied. Jeffreys had become a breed. End of 2. Okay, so we get the wolf's side, sort of. So that we know that the wolf is being tolerated or not, Ursus is not being fined or anything by having a wolf, because it has become in fashion to have wolves, particularly smaller wolves. And you also get the vibe that people are punished and imprisoned for almost nothing. Just the indication of the sign that we read saying like gold itself is being like wears down, and the wearing down bits are like floating in the airs. It's like on your clothes, all of these things, and it being in the air, like you can breathe it in, you can like swallow it down. And it's a good thing that the sign is so distorted and worn that like sheriffs can't read it, because people would probably be arrested for breathing in the worn down gold bits, which is saying a lot of the society that we're in. Terrible. Terrible. 3. In the interior of the van, there were 2 other inscriptions. Above the box, on a whitewashed plank, a hand had written in ink as follows: "The only things necessary to know. The Baron, peer of England, wears a cap with 6 pearls. The coronets begin with the rank of Viscount. The Viscount wears a coronet of which the pearls are without number. The Earl, a coronet with the pearls upon points, mingled with strawberry leaves, placed low between. The Marquis, one with pearls and leaves on the same level. The Duke, one with strawberry leaves alone, no pearls. The Royal Duke, a circlet of crosses and fleurs-de-lis. The Prince of Wales, crown like that of the King, but unclosed. The Duke is a most high and most puissant prince, the Marquis and Earl most noble and puissant lord, the Viscount noble and puissant lord, the Baron a trusty lord, the Duke is his grace, the other peers their lordships. Most honourable is higher than right honourable. Lords who are peers are lords in their own rights. Lords who are not peers are lords by courtesy. There are no real lords excepting such as are peers. The House of Lords is a chamber and a court, concilium et curia, legislature and court of justice. The Commons, who are the people, then when ordered to the bar of the Lords, humbly present themselves bareheaded before the peers, who remain covered. The Commons send up their bills by 40 members, who present the bill with 3 low bows. The Lords send their bills to the Commons by a mere clerk. In case of disagreement, the two houses confer in the Painted Chamber, the peers seated and covered, the Commons standing and bareheaded. Peers go to Parliament in their coaches in file. The Commons do not. Some peers go to Westminster in open 4-wheeled chariots. The use of these and of coaches emblazoned with coats of arms and coronets is allowed only to peers, and forms a portion of their dignity. Barons have the same rank as bishops. To be a baron peer of England, it is necessary to be in possession of a tenure from the king per baroniam integrum, by full barony. The full barony consists of 13 knights' fees, and 1/3 part, each knight's fee being of the value of £20 sterling, which makes in all 400 marks. The head of the barony, caput baronet, is a castle disposed by inheritance, as England herself, that is to say, descending to daughters, if there be no sons, and in that case going to the eldest daughter, cateris filiabis aliundae satisfactus. There's a footnote right after that, and it says, as much as to say the other daughters are provided for as best may be. Note by Ursus on the margin of the wall. Barons have the degree of lord in Saxon, leford, dominus in High Latin, lordus in Low Latin. The eldest and youngest sons of viscounts and barons are the first esquires in the kingdom. The eldest sons of peers takes precedence of knights of the garter. The younger sons do not. The eldest son of a viscount comes after all barons and precedes all baronets. Every daughter of a peer is a lady. Other English girls are plain mistress. All judges rank below peers. The sergeants wear a lambskin tippet. The judge one of patchwork, diminuto vario, made up of a variety of little white furs, always excepting ermine. Ermine is reserved for peers and the king. A lord never takes an oath, either to the crown or the law. His word suffices, he says, upon my honor. By a law of Edward VI, peers have the privilege of committing manslaughter. Excuse me? A peer who kills a man without premeditation is not prosecuted. The persons of peers is inviolable. A peer cannot be held in durance, save in the Tower of London. A writ of supplicavit cannot be granted against a peer. A peer sent for by the king has the right to kill 1 or 2 deer in the royal park. A peer holds in his castle a baron's court of justice. It is unworthy of a peer to walk the street in a cloak, followed by 2 footmen. He should only show himself attended by a great train of gentlemen of his household. A peer can be amerced only by his peers, and let's try that again. A peer can be amerced only by his peers, and never to any greater amount than £5, excepting in the case of a duke, who can be amerced 10. A peer may retain 6 alien born, any other Englishman but 4. A peer can have wine custom free, an earl 8 turns. A peer is alone exempt from presenting himself before the sheriff of the circuit. A peer cannot be assessed toward the militia. When it pleases a peer, he raises a regiment and gives it to the king. Thus have done their graces the Dukes of Athol, Hamilton, and Northumberland. A peer can hold only of a peer. In a civil cause, he can demand the adjournment of the case if there be not at least one knight on the jury. A peer nominates his own chaplains. Champlains? What am I saying? Chaplains. A baron appoints 3 chaplains, a viscount 4, an earl and a marquis 5, a duke 6. A peer cannot be put to the rack even for high treason. A peer cannot be branded on the hand. A peer is a clerk, though he knows not how to read. In law he knows. A duke has a right to a canopy, or cloth of state, in all places where the king is not present. A viscount may have one in his house. A baron has a cover of assay, which may be held under his cup while he drinks. A baroness has the right to have her train borne by a man in the presence of a viscountess. 86 tables with 500 dishes are served every day in the royal palace at each meal. If a plebeian strikes a lord, his hand is cut off. A lord is very nearly a king. The king is very nearly a god. The earth is a lordship. The English address God as my lord. Opposite this writing was written a second one in the same fashion, which ran thus. Okay, the other writing. Satisfaction which must suffice those who have nothing. Henry Auverquerque, Earl of Grantham, who sits in the House of Lords between the Earl of Jersey and the Earl of Greenwich, has 100,000 a year. To his lordship brings the palace of Grantham Terrace, built all of marble and famous for what is called the Labyrinth of Passages, a curiosity which contains the Scarlet Corridor in marble of Sarincolin, the Brown Corridor in Lumical of Astrakhan, the White Corridor in marble of Lani, the Black Corridor in marble of Alabanda, the Gray Corridor in marble of Sterema, the Yellow Corridor in marble of Hesse, the Green Corridor in marble of Tyrol, the Red Corridor, half cherry spotted marble of Bohemia, half Lumical of Cordova, the Blue Corridor in Turkine of Genoa, the Violet and Granite of Catalonia, the morning-hued corridor veined black and white in slate of Mervedro, the Pink Corridor in Sipylline of the Alps, the Pearl Corridor in Lumical of Nanetta, and the corridor of all colors called the Courtiers' Corridor in Motley. Richard Lothair, Viscount Lonsdale, owns Lothair of Westmoreland, which has a magnificent approach and a flight of entrance steps which seem to invite the ingress of kings. Richard, Earl of Scarborough, Viscount and Baron Lumley of Lumley Castle, Viscount Lumley of Waterford in Ireland, and Lord Lieutenant and Vice Admiral of the County of Northumberland and of Durham, both city and county, owns the double castleward of Old and New Sandbeck, where you admire a superb railing in the form of a semicircle surrounding the basin of a matchless fountain. He has, besides, his castle of Lumley. Robert Darcy, Earl of Holderness, has his domain of Holderness, with baronial towers and large gardens laid out in French fashion, where he drives in his coach and six, preceded by 2 outriders, as becomes a peer of London. Charles Beauclerk, Duke of St. Albans, Earl of Burford, Baron Headington, Grand Falconer of England, has an abode at Windsor, regal even by the side of the king. Charles Bodville Robartes, Baron Robartes of Truro, Viscount Bodmin and Earl of Radnor, owns Wimpole in Cambridgeshire, which is as 3 palaces in one, having 3 facades, 1 bowed and 2 triangular. The approach is by an avenue of trees, 4 deep. The most noble and most puissant Lord Philip, Baron Herbert of Cardiff, Earl of Montgomery and of Pembroke, Ross of Kendal, Parr, Fitzhuff, Marmion, St. Quintin, and Herbert of Shurland, Warden of the Stannaries in the counties of Cornwall and Devon, hereditary visitor of Jesus College, possesses the wonderful gardens at Wilton, where there are 2 sheaf-like fountains, finer than those of his most Christian Majesty King Louis the Ninth at Versailles. Charles Somerset, Duke of Somerset, owns Somerset House of the Thames, which is equal to the Villa Pamphili at Rome, and the chimney pieces are seen 2 porcelain vases of the dynasty of the Yuans, which are worth 500,000 in French money. In Yorkshire, Arthur, Lord Ingram, Viscount Irwin, has Temple Newsane, which is entered under a triumphal arch, and which has large, wide roofs resembling Moorish terraces. Robert, Lord Ferrers of Chartley, Bourchier, and Lonvaine, has Staunton Harold in Leicester, of which the park is geometrically planned in the shape of a temple with a facade, and in front of the piece of water is the great church with the square belfry, which belongs to his lordship. In the county of Northampton, Charles Spencer, Earl of Sunderland, member of His Majesty's Privy Council, possesses Althorp, at the entrance of which is a railing with 4 columns surmounted by groups in marble. Lawrence Hyde, Earl of Rochester, has, in Surrey, New Park, rendered magnificent by its sculptured pinnacles, its circular lawn belted by trees, and its woodland, at the extremity of which is a little mountain, artistically rounded, and surmounted by a large oak, which can be seen from afar. Philip Stanhope, Earl of Chesterfield, possesses Bretby Hall in Derbyshire, with a splendid clock tower, falconries, warrens, and very fine sheets of water, long, square, and oval, one of which is shaped like a mirror, and has 2 jets, which throw the water to a great height. Charles Cornwallis, Baron Cornwallis of Eye, owns Broome Hall, a palace of the 14th century. The most noble Algernon Capel, Viscount Maiden, Earl of Essex, has Cashiobury in Hertfordshire, a seat which has the shape of a capital H, and which rejoins sportsmen with its abundance of game. Charles, Lord Ossulstone, owns Darnley in Middlesex, approached by Italian gardens. James Cecil, Earl of Salisbury, has 7 leagues from London, Hatfield House, with its 4 lordly pavilions, its belfry in the centre, and its grand courtyard of black and white slabs, like that of Saint Germain. This palace, which has a frontage 272 feet in length, was built in the reign of James I by the Lord High Treasurer of England, the great-grandfather of the present Earl. To be seen there is the bed of one of the Countesses of Salisbury. It is of inestimable value, and made entirely of Brazilian wood, which is a panacea against the bites of serpents, and which is called milhombres, that is to say, 1,000 men. On this bed is inscribed, Hone sui qui mal ipens. Edward Rich, Earl of Warwick and Holland, is owner of Warwick Castle. where whole oaks are burnt in the fireplaces. In the parish of Sevenoaks, Charles Sackville, Baron Buckhurst, Baron Cranfield, Earl of Dorset and Middlesex, is owner of Knowle, which is as large as a town and is composed of 3 palaces, standing parallel one behind the other, like ranks of infantry. There are 6 covered flights of steps on the principal frontage, and a gate under a keep with 4 towers. Thomas Thynne, Baron Thynne of Warminster, and Viscount Weymouth, possesses Longleat, in which there are as many chimneys, cupolas, pinnacles, pepper boxes, pavilions, and turrets as at Chambord in France, which belongs to the king. Henry Howard, Earl of Suffolk, owns 12 leagues from London, the Palace of Audley End in Essex, which in grandeur and dignity scarcely yields the palm of the Escorial of the King of Spain. In Bedfordshire, Rest House and Park, which is a whole district enclosed by ditches, walls, woodlands, rivers, and hills, belongs to Henry, Marquis of Kent. Hampton Court, in Herefordshire, with its strong embattled keep, and its gardens bounded by a piece of water which divides them from the forest, belongs to Thomas Lord Coningsby. Grimsthorpe, in Lincolnshire, with its long facade intersected by turrets in pale, its park, its fish ponds, its pheasantries, its sheepholds, its lawns, its grounds planted with rows of trees, its groves, its walks, its shrubberies, its flower beds and borders, formed in square and lozenge shape, and resembling great carpets, its race courses, and the majestic sweep for carriages to turn in at the entrance of the house, belongs to Robert Earl Lindsay, hereditary lord of the Forest of Waltham. Up Park, in Essex, a square house with 2 symmetrical belfried pavilions on each side of the great courtyard, belongs to the Right Honourable Ford, Baron Grey of Werke, Viscount Glendale, and Earl of Tankerville. Newnham Paddocks, in Warwickshire, which has 2 quadrangular fish ponds and a gabled archway with a large window of 4 panes, belongs to the Earl of Denbigh, who is also Count von Rheinfelden in Germany. Witham Abbey, in Berkshire, with its French garden, in which there are 4 curiously trimmed arbors, and its great embattled towers, supported by 2 bastions, belongs to Montague, Earl of Abingdon, who also owns Rycott, of which he is baron, and the principal door of which bears the device Virtus Arieti Fortuar. William Cavendish, Duke of Devonshire, has 6 dwelling places, of which Chatsworth, 2-storied and of the finest order of Grecian architecture, is one. The Viscount of Kinalmeaky, who is Earl of Cork in Ireland, is owner of Burlington House, Piccadilly, with its extensive gardens reaching to the fields outside London. He is also owner of Chiswick, where there are 9 magnificent lodges. He also owns Londesborough, which is a new house by the side of an old palace. The Duke of Beaufort owns Chelsea, which contains 2 Gothic buildings and a Florentine one. He has also Badminton in Gloucester, a residence from which a number of avenues branch out like rays from a star. The most noble and puissant Prince Henry, Duke of Beaufort, is also Marquis, the Earl of Worcester, Earl of Glamorgan, Viscount Grosmont, and Baron Herbert of Chepstow, Ragland and Gower, Baron Beaufort of Caldecott Castle, and Baron de Botticourt. John Hollis, Duke of Newcastle and Marquis of Clare, owns Bolsover with its majestic square keeps. His also is Houghton in Nottinghamshire, where a round pyramid made to imitate the Tower of Babel stands in the center of a basin of water. William, Earl of Craven, Viscount Uffington, excuse me, there's no H there, Uffington, and Baron Craven of Hampstead Marshall owns Combe Abbey in Warwickshire, where is to be seen the finest water jet in England, and in Berkshire two baronies, Hampstead Marshall, on the facade of which are five Gothic lanterns sunk in the wall, and Ashdown Park, which is a country seat situate at the point of intersection of crossroads in a forest. Linnaeus, Lord Clancharlie, Baron Clancharlie, and Hunkerville, Marquis of Carleone in Sicily, derives his title from the castle of Clancharlie, built in 912 by Edward the Elder as a defense against the Danes. Besides Hunkerville House in London, which is a palace, he has Corleone Lodge at Windsor, which is another, and 8 castle words, one at Burton-on-Trent, with a royalty on the carriage of plaster of Paris, then Grumdaith, Humble, Morecambe, Trewardbraith, Hellcurters, where there is a miraculous well, Fillinmore, with its turf bogs, Reculver, near the ancient city Vagniac, Vinnicounten, on the Moel Mountain, besides 19 boroughs and villages with reeves and the whole of Penneth Chase, all of which brings his lordship £40,000 a year. The 172 peers enjoying their dignities under James II possess among them altogether a revenue of £1,272,000 sterling a year, which is the 11th part of the revenue of England. In the margin opposite the last name, that of Linnaeus Lord Clancharlie, there is a note in the handwriting of Ursus. Rebel, in exile, houses, lands, and chattels sequestered. It is well. End of 3. I do think, okay, it's a lot. I don't know if necessarily we are going to have to like memorize all of this. I do think that you guys are right. It is like maybe meant to show you like the superfluousness and unnecessariness and pomp and circumstanceness and silliness of the upper class. Like, I am this duke of this place and I have these castles and this is what it is. I am this earl of this place. Like, it's just so silly and so unnecessary. And I think it's hilarious that Ursus has all of this written on one side of his van. That's so silly. That's so silly. Is it a reminder to be like, oh yes, this is who this person is? Like sort of to like keep track of everybody? Or is it also just like at least for Ursus to be like, yeah, this is really silly, and here I am in my van with my wolf and my bearskin pelt. It's so silly. Right. I can see a lot of readers being like, "Welp, I'm done." That was a good college try, and now I don't need to read anymore, especially if it's gonna be like the rest of this. Yeah. Yeah. For sure a bold move. I feel like so many people would have stopped reading at this point. Yeah. And to say like to have like all of them listed out and then like have the note next to Linnaeus to be like what was it? Like disgraced, disbanded, something like that. In exile. houses, lands, and chattels sequestered. It is well. Is interesting. I find that interesting. Is it like a TMZ almost? Or like a People Entertainment Tonight? I don't know. I don't know what the equivalent would be to be like following like the royals. It's interesting. It's interesting. Um, yeah. I just think it's so interesting to have like it's so blatant to have like Ursus who lives in a van with his dog, and then also the like almost fear or like undertone of it being like you could probably be arrested just for breathing around gold because you would have ingested the particles that have worn away and that could get you thrown to jail because you're stealing. Like I just think that that's so interesting to juxtapose like that little tidbit with all of these like royals who own so many different places and are just so connected and can do whatever they want. It's fine. It's totally not upsetting. I'm upset. And I feel like we're going to be upset this whole time. 4. Ursus admired Homo. One admires one's like. It is a law. To be always raging inwardly and grumbling outwardly was the normal condition of Ursus. He was the malcontent of creation. By nature he was a man ever in opposition. He took the world unkindly. He gave his satisfecit to no one and to nothing. The bee did not atone, by its honey-making, for its sting. A full-blown rose did not absolve the sun for yellow fever and black vomit. The bee did not atone, by its honey-making, for its sting. A full-blown rose did not absolve the sun for yellow fever and black vomit. Ooh, I like that. Okay. It is probable that in secret Ursus criticized Providence a good deal. Evidently, he would say, the devil works by a spring, and the wrong that God does is having let go the trigger. He approved of none but princes, and he had his own peculiar way of expressing his approbation. One day, when James II made a gift to the Virgin in a Catholic chapel in Ireland of a massive gold lamp, Ursus, passing that way with Homo, who was more indifferent to such things, broke out in admiration before the crowd and exclaimed, "It is certain that the Blessed Virgin wants a lamp much more than those barefooted children there require shoes." Such proofs of his loyalty and such evidences of his respect for established powers probably contributed in no small degree to make the magistrates tolerate his vagabond life and his low alliance with a wolf. Sometimes of an evening, through the weakness of friendship, he allowed the wolf to stretch his limbs and wander at liberty about the caravan. The wolf was incapable of an abuse of confidence, and behaved in society, that is to say, among men, with the discretion of a poodle. All the same, if bad-tempered officials had to be dealt with, difficulties might have arisen. So Ursus kept the honest wolf chained up as much as possible. From a political point of view, his writing about gold, not yet intelligible in itself, and now become undecipherable, was but a smear, and gave no handle to the enemy. Even after the time of James II, and under the respectable reign of William and Mary, his caravan might have been seen peacefully going about its rounds of the little English country towns. He travelled freely from one end of Great Britain to the other, selling his philtres and phials, and sustaining, with the assistance of his wolf, his quack mummeries, and he passed with ease through the meshes of the nets which the police at that period had spread all over England in order to sift wandering gangs, and especially to stop the progress of the Comprachicos. This was right enough. Ursus belonged to the gang, to no gang. Ursus lived with Ursus, a tete-a-tete, into which the wolf gently thrust his nose. If Ursus could have had his way, he would have been a Caribbee. That being impossible, he preferred to be alone. The solitary man is a modified savage, accepted by civilization. He who wanders most is most alone, hence his continual change of place. To remain anywhere long suffocated him with the sense of being tamed. He passed his life in passing on his way. The sight of towns increased his taste for brambles, thickets, thorns, and holes in the rock. His home was the forest. He did not feel himself much out of his element in the murmur of crowded streets, which is like enough to the bluster of trees. The crowd to some extent satisfies our taste for the desert. What he disliked in his van was its having a door and windows, and thus resembling a house. He would have realized his ideal had he been able to put a cave on 4 wheels and travel in a den. He did not smile, as we have already said, but he used to laugh. Sometimes, indeed infrequently, a bitter laugh. There is consent in a smile, while a laugh is often a refusal. Ooh, that's a cool phrase too. We're getting some cool phrases. I like this. There is consent in a smile, while a laugh is often a refusal. Oh, I like that. His great business was to hate the human race. He was implacable in that hate. Having made it clear that human life is a dreadful thing, having observed the superposition of evils, kings on the people, war on kings, the plague of war, famine on the plague, folly on everything, having proved a certain measure of chastisement in the mere fact of existence, having recognized that death is a deliverance, when they brought him a sick man, he cured him. He had cordials and beverages to prolong the lives of the old. He put lame cripples on their legs again, and hurled this sarcasm at them. There, you are on your paws once more. May you walk long in this valley of tears. When he saw a poor man dying of hunger, he gave him all the pence he had about him, growling out, "Live on, you wretch! Eat! Last a long time. It is not I who would shorten your penal servitude." After which, he would rub his hands and say, "I do men all the harm I can." Through the little window at the back, passers-by could read on the ceiling of the van these words, written within, but visible from without, inscribed with charcoal in big letters: Ursus, philosopher. And that is the end of Ursus's part. Ursus's. I like Ursus. It's pretty cool. Yeah, this was cool. So now we have Ursus being like, I hate society. I hate people, but I'm not necessarily, I'm going to help people so that they can live out their punishment by being on this earth. And it's pretty great. I like Ursus. I like it. I like him a lot. He's just become so much more interesting. I mean, what could be more interesting than having bear pelt and wearing it around? But he's become more interesting and I like it. Like more like multifaceted, and that's just really cool. I love when characters are not just like one tone, but they got the depth to them. All right. Another preliminary chapter, the comprachicos. Comprachicos. See, we haven't even we've started the book, but we haven't even started the book. These are just preliminary chapters. I appreciate it because it's like throwing us into the world and giving us other insight, I feel like. I'm digging it. Okay. The comprachicos. 1. Who now knows the word comprachicos, and who knows its meaning? The comprachicos, or comprapequeños, were a hideous and nondescript association of wanderers, famous in the 17th century, forgotten in the 18th, unheard of in the 19th. The comprachicos are like the succession powder, an ancient social characteristic detail. They are part of old human ugliness. To the great eye of history, which sees everything collectively, the comprachicos belong to the colossal fact of slavery. Joseph, sold by his brethren, is a chapter of their story. The comprachicos have left their traces in the penal laws of Spain and England. You find here and there in the dark confusion of English laws, the impress of this horrible truth, like the footprint of a savage in the forest. Comprachicos, the same as comprapequeños, is a compound Spanish word signifying child buyers. They bought and sold them. They did not steal them. The kidnapping of children is another branch of industry. And what did they make of these children? Monsters. Why monsters? To laugh at. The populace must needs laugh, and kings too. The mountebank is wanted in the streets, the jester at the Louvre. The one is called a clown, the other a fool. The efforts of man to procure himself pleasure are at times worthy of the attention of the philosopher. What are we sketching in these few preliminary pages? A chapter in the most terrible of books. A book which might be entitled The Farming of the Unhappy by the Happy. End of the first part. That gave me chills. The Farming of the Unhappy by the Happy. Ooh. Ooh. We are setting some serious shit up, and I'm so excited and upset and terrified to see what happens. Okay, so this chapter we get the comprachicos or compra pequeños, and they are child buyers. So they buy and sell children, but they do not kidnap them, for that is a different branch in this industry. Do not confuse the two. Why do we do this? Because we need them to be monsters. And why do we need them to be monsters? Because we must laugh. I got chills. Wild. I have chills. I have chills. The farming of the unhappy by the happy. Oh, oh. All right. Buckle up, people. 2. A child destined to be a plaything for men. Such a thing has existed. Such a thing exists even now. In simple and savage times, such a thing constituted an especial trade. The 17th century, called the Great Century, was of those times. It was a century very Byzantine in tone. It combined corrupt simplicity with delicate ferocity, a curious variety of civilization. A tiger with a simper. Madame de... Oh, man. Sévigné? I apologize. Truly. to all of France for not being able to pronounce that word. Minces on the subject of the wheel. That century traded a good deal in children. Flattering historians have concealed the sore, but have divulged the remedy. Vincent de Paul. In order that a human toy should succeed, he must be taken early. The dwarf must be fashioned when young. We play with childhood. But a well-formed child is not very amusing. A hunchback is better fun. At this time, Hunchback of Notre Dame has already been written. This book came afterward. Hence grew an art. There were trainers who took a man and made him an abhorrence. They took a face and made a muzzle. They stunted growth. They kneaded the features. The artificial production of teratological cases had its rules. It was quite a science. What one can imagine as the antithesis of orthopedy. Where God had put a look, their art put a squint. Where God had made harmony, they made discord. Where God had made the perfect picture, they re-established the sketch. And, in the eyes of connoisseurs, it was the sketch which was perfect. They debased animals as well. They invented piebald horses. Turenne rode a piebald horse. In our own days, do they not dye dogs blue and green? Nature is our canvas. Man has always wished to add something to God's work. Man retouches creation, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. The court buffoon was nothing but an attempt to lead back man to the monkey. It was a progress the wrong way, a masterpiece in retrogression. At the same time, they tried to make a man of the monkey. Barbara, Duchess of Cleveland and Countess of Southampton, had a marmoset for a page. Frances Sutton, Baroness Dudley, 8th peeress in the Bench of Barons, had tea served by a baboon clad in cold brocade, which her ladyship called my black. Catherine Sedley, Countess of Dorchester, used to go and take her seat in Parliament in a coach with armorial bearings, behind which stood their muzzles stuck up in the air. 3 Cape monkeys in grand livery. A Duchess of Medinaceli, whose toilet Cardinal Pole witnessed, had her stockings put on by an orange orangutan. Sorry, orangutan is just written very differently than how I've seen it before. It's ORANG dash OUTANG. The dash just like totally threw me off. These monkeys, raised in the scale, were a counterpoise to men brutalized and bestialized. This promiscuousness of man and beast, desired by the great, was especially prominent in the case of the dwarf and the dog. The dwarf never quitted the dog, which was always bigger than him. The dog was the pair of the dwarf. It was as if they were coupled with a collar. This juxtaposition is authenticated by a mass of domestic records, notably by the portrait of Geoffrey Hudson, dwarf of Henrietta of France, daughter of Henry IV, and wife of Charles I. To degrade man tends to deform him. The suppression of his state was completed by disfigurement. Certain vivisectors of that period succeeded marvelously well in effacing from the human face the divine effigy. Dr. Conquest, member of the Amen Street College and judicial visitor of the chemists' shops of London, wrote a book in Latin on this pseudo-surgery, the processes of which he describes. If we are to believe Justice of Carrickfergus, the inventor of this branch of surgery was a monk named Avonmore, an Irish word signifying great river. The dwarf of the Elector Palatine, Percheo, I'm so sorry about the words and the names, whose effigy, or ghost, springs from a magical box in the cave of Heidelberg, was a remarkable specimen of this science, very varied in its application. It fashioned beings the law of whose existence was hideously simple. It permitted them to suffer and commanded them to amuse. End of part 2. We just went from like maybe 50 to like 1,000 miles per hour all of a sudden. Part 3. The manufacture of monsters was practiced on a large scale and comprised various branches. The Sultan required them, so did the Pope, the one to guard his women, the other to say his prayers. These were of a peculiar kind, incapable of reproduction. Scarcely human beings, they were useful to voluptuousness and to religion. The Seraglio and the Sistine Chapel utilized the same species of monsters, fierce in the former case, mild in the latter. They knew how to produce things in those days which are not produced now. They had talents which we lack, and it is not without reason that some good folk cry out that the decline has come. We no longer know how to sculpture living human flesh. This is a consequent on the loss of the art of torture. Men were once virtuosi in that respect, but are so no longer. The art has become so simplified that it will soon disappear altogether. In cutting the limbs of living men, in opening their bellies, and in dragging out their entrails, phenomena were grasped on the moment and discoveries made. We are obliged to renounce these experiments now, and are thus deprived of the progress which surgery made by the aid of the executioner. The vivisection of former days was not limited to the manufacture of phenomena for the marketplace, of buffoons for the palace, a species of augmentative of the courtier, and eunuchs for sultans and popes. It abounded in variety. One of its triumphs was the manufacture of cocks for the King of England. It was the custom, in the palace of the kings of England, to have a sort of watchman who crowned like a cock. This watcher, awake while all others slept, ranged the palace, and raised from hour to hour the cry of the farmyard, repeating it as often as was necessary, and thus supplying a clock. This man, promoted to be cock, had in childhood undergone the operation of a pharynx, which was part of the art described by Dr. Conquest. Under Charles II, the salivation, inseparable to the operation having disgusted the Duchess of Portsmouth, the appointment was indeed preserved, so that the splendor of the crowd should not be tarnished, but they got an unmutilated man to represent the cock. A retired officer was generally selected for this honorable employment. Under James II, the functionary was named William Sampson, cock, and received for his crow £9, 2s. Annually. The memoirs of Catherine II inform us that at St. Petersburg, scarcely 100 years since, whenever the Tsar or Tsarina was displeased with a Russian prince, he was forced to squat down in the great antechamber of the palace, and to remain in that posture a certain number of days, mewing like a cat, or clucking like a sitting hen, and pecking his food from the floor. These fashions have passed away, but not so much, perhaps, as one might imagine. Nowadays, courtiers slightly modified their intonation in clucking to please their masters. More than one picks up from the ground, we will not say from the mud, what he eats. It is very fortunate that kings cannot err, hence their contradictions never perplex us. In approving always, one is sure to be always right. which is pleasant. Louis the Ninth, nope, I lied, I'm sorry. Louis the 14th would not have liked to see at Versailles either an officer acting the cock or a prince acting the turkey. That which raised the royal and imperial dignity in England and Russia would have seemed to Louis the Great incompatible with the crown of St. Louis. We know what his displeasure was when Madame Henrietta forgot herself so far as to see a hen in a dream, which was, indeed, a grave breach of good manners in a lady of the court. When one is of the court, one should not dream of the courtyard. Lucette, it may be remembered, was nearly as scandalized as Louis XIV. End of the third part. Yeah, everything is awful and terrible. Okay, so we have this doctor who has revolutionized and written books on how to mutilate people and children. And I hate that. To be sold to the wealthy and the highborn for entertainment, for purely entertainment. And we also get uh like a very humiliating way of being punished by meowing like a cat, pecking like hens, like very demeaning, very humiliating, upsetting punishments. 4. The commerce in children in the 17th century, as we have explained, was connected with a trade. The comprachicos engaged in the commerce and carried on the trade. They bought children, worked a little on the raw material, and resold them afterward. The vendors were of all kinds, from the wretched father getting rid of his family to the master utilizing his stud of slaves. The sale of men was a simple matter. In our own time, we have had fighting to maintain this right. Remember that it is less than a century ago since the Elector of Hesse sold his subjects to the King of England, who required men to be killed in America. Kings went to the Elector of Hesse as we go to the butcher to buy meat. The Elector had food for powder and stock, and hung up his subjects in his shop. Come buy, it is for sale. In England, under Jeffreys, after the tragical episode of Monmouth, there were many lords and gentlemen beheaded and quartered. Those who were executed left wives and daughters, widows and orphans, whom James II gave to the Queen, his wife. The Queen sold these ladies to William Penn. Very likely the King had so much per cent on the transaction. The extraordinary thing is, not that James II should have sold the women, but that William Penn should have bought them. Penn's purchase is excused or explained by the fact that having a desert to sow with men, he needed women as farming implements. Her gracious Majesty made a good business out of these ladies. The young sold dear. We may imagine, with the uneasy feeling which a complicated scandal arouses, that probably some old duchesses were thrown in for cheap. The comprachicos were also called the chelas, maybe, a Hindu word which conveys the image of harrying a nest. For a long time, the comprachicos only partially concealed themselves. There is sometimes in the social order a favoring shadow thrown over iniquitous trades in which they thrive. In our own day, we have seen an association of the kind in Spain, under the direction of the ruffian Ramon Celis, last from 1834 to 1866, and hold 3 provinces under terror for 30 years, Valencia, Alicante, and Murica. Under the Stuarts, the comprachicos were by no means in bad odor at court. On occasions, they were used for reasons of state. For James II, they were almost in instrumentum regni. It was a time when families, which were refractory or in the way, were dismembered. when a descent was cut short, when heirs were suddenly suppressed. At times, one branch was defrauded to the profit of another. The Comprachicos had a genius for disfiguration, which recommended them to state policy. To disfigure is better than to kill. There was, indeed, the iron mask, but that was a mighty measure. Europe could not be peopled with iron masks, while deformed tumblers ran about the streets without creating any surprises. Besides, the iron mask is removable. Not so the mask of flesh. You are masked forever by your own flesh. What can be more ingenious? So they're like, okay, but there's this mask, and the reason that they don't use masks is because masks can be taken off, and you can't just, like, take your face off, so might as well look this way all the time. I hate it. I hate everything about this. The Comprachicos worked on man as those who work on trees. They had their secrets, as we have said. They had tricks which are now lost arts. A sort of fantastic, stunted thing left their hands. It was ridiculous and wonderful. They would touch up a little being with such skill that its father could not have known it. And then we get, like, a phrase in French, but I have no idea what it says. And there's no way that I'm going to be able to, like, say it close enough to French for anybody to understand what it means anyway. But, speaking some French, as Racine says in Bad French. Perfect. Sometimes they left the spine straight and remade the face. They unmarked a child as one might unmark a pocket handkerchief. Products destined for tumblers had their joints dislocated in a masterly manner. You would have said they had been boned. Thus, gymnasts were made. Not only did the Comprachicos take away his face from the child, they also took away his memory. At least, they took away all they could of it. The child had no consciousness of the mutilation to which he had been subjected. This frightful surgery left its traces on his countenance, but not on his mind. The most he could recall was that one day he had been seized by men, that next he had fallen asleep, and then he had been cured. Cured of what? He did not know. Of burnings by sulfur and incisions by the iron he remembered nothing. The Comprachicos deadened the little patient by means of a stupefying powder which was thought to be magical, and suppressed all pain. This powder has been known from time immemorial in China, and is still employed there in the present day. The Chinese have been beforehand with us in all our inventions: printing, artillery, aerostation, chloroform. Only the discoveries which in Europe at once takes life and birth and becomes a prodigy and a wonder, remains a chrysalis in China, and is preserved in a death-like state. China is a museum of embryos. Sorry, lost my place for a second. Here we go. Since we are in China, let us remain there for a moment to note something most peculiar. In China, from time immemorial, they have possessed a certain refinement of industry and art. It is the art of molding a living man. They take a child 2 or 3 years old, put him in a porcelain vase, more or less grotesque, which is made without top or bottom, to allow egress for the head and feet. During the day the vase is set upright, and at night is laid down to allow the child to sleep. Thus the child thickens without growing taller, filling up with his compressed flesh and distorted bones the reliefs of the vase, or in the vase. This development in a bottle continues many years later. After a certain time it becomes irreparable. When they consider that time is accomplished and the monster made, they break the vase. The child comes out, and behold, there is a man in the shape of a mug. This is convenient, By ordering your dwarfs betimes, you are able to have it of the shape you wish. End of 4. Everything is terrible, and I hate it all. It's deeply uncomfortable, deeply unsettling. So this chapter just goes more into it, and then we get a very specific instance in China how they have sort of like used, like they've sort of invented chloroform first, and like that is the drug that the comprachicos use so that the children like don't feel anything and don't remember anything of their surgeries, which I'm glad that they don't feel anything. That sounds super terrible, like way awful. And yeah, everything is terrible and I hate it. I hate it so much. And we're getting the constant reminder that yeah, everything is terrible. And you know what's even more terrible? This is for people, this is for their entertainment. This is for people to buy for their entertainment. And I hate every minute of it. And these are still the pre-chapters. Still the pre-chapters. And this is such a good like side by side, the Comprachicos chapters and all of this happenings with Ursus. Um, very different, but very much the same in that we get like such a behind the scenes and such like an up close view at the world that it is and how terrible and horrible it is, but pretending to be really nice and beautiful because we have all these palaces. I don't like it. 5. James II tolerated the Comprachicos for the good reason that he made use of them. At least it happened that he did so more than once. We do not always disdain to use what we despise. This low trade, an excellent expedient sometimes, for the higher one which is called state policy, was willingly left in a miserable state, but was not persecuted. There was no surveillance, but a certain amount of attention. Thus, much might be useful. The law closed one eye, the king opened the other. Sometimes the king went so far as to avow his complicity. There are audacities of monarchical terrorism. The disfigured one was marked with the fleur de lis. They took from him the mark of God. They put on him the mark of the king. Jacob Astley, knight and baronet, lord of Melton Constable in the county of Norfolk, had in his family a child who had been sold, and upon whose forehead the dealer had imprinted a fleur de lis with a hot iron. In certain cases in which it was held desirable to register for some reason the royal origin of the new position made for the child, they used such means. England has always done us the honor to utilize, for her personal service, the fleur de lis. The Comprachicos, allowing for the shade which divides a trade from a fanaticism, were analogous to the stranglers of India. They lived among themselves in gangs, and to facilitate their progress, affected somewhat of the Merry Andrew. They encamped here and there, but they were grave and religious, bearing no affinity to other nomads, and incapable of theft. The people for a long time wrongly confounded them with the Moors of Spain and the Moors of China. The Moors of Spain were coiners, and the Moors of China were thieves. There was nothing of the sort about the Comprachicos. They were honest folk. Whatever you may think of them, they were sometimes sincerely scrupulous. They pushed open a door, entered, bargained for a child, paid, and departed. All was done with propriety. They were of all countries, under the name of Comprachicos, fraternalized English, French, Castilians, Germans, Italians, a unity of idea, a unity of superstition, the pursuit of the same calling, make such fusions. In this fraternity of vagabonds, those of the Mediterranean seaboard represented the east, those of the Atlantic seaboard the west. Many Basques conversed with many Irishmen. The Basque with the Irishman understood each other. They speak the old Punic jargon. Add to this the intimate relations of Catholic Ireland with Catholic Spain, relations such that they terminated by bringing to the gallows in London one almost king of Ireland, the Celtic lord of Branney, from which resulted the conquest of the county of Leitrim. The Comprachicos were rather a fellowship than a tribe, rather a residuum than a fellowship. It was all the riffraff of the universe, having for their trade a crime. It was a sort of harlequin people, all composed of rags. To recruit a man was to sew on a tatter. To wander was the Comprachicos' law of existence, to appear and disappear. What is barely tolerated cannot take root, even in the kingdoms where their business supplied the courts and, on occasions, served as an auxiliary to the royal power. They were now and then suddenly ill-treated. Kings made use of their art and sent the artists to the galleys. These inconsistencies belong to the ebb and flow of royal caprice. For such is our pleasure. A rolling stone and a roving trade gather no moss. The Comprachicos were poor. They might have said what the lean and ragged witch observed when she saw them setting fire to the stake. And then we get some French. Le jeu ne veut pas le chandelle. Something like that. I'm so sorry. I probably should have taken French at some point in my life. It is possible, nay probable, their chiefs remaining unknown, that the wholesale contractors in the trade were rich. After the lapse of 2 centuries, it would be difficult to throw any light on this point. It was, as we have said, a fellowship. It had its laws, its oaths, its formulae. It had almost its Kabbalah. Anyone nowadays wishing to know all about the Comprachicos need only go to Biscaya or Galicia. There were many Basques among them, and it is in those mountains that one hears their history. To this day, the Comprachicos are spoken of at Oiarzun, at Urbistando, at Lezo, at Astigarraga. Take care, child, or I'll call the Comprachicos. Oh, they use it like a warning. Aguardate, niño, que voy a llamar al Comprachicos, is the cry with which mothers frighten their children in that country. That's terrifying. I don't like that at all. The Comprachicos, like the Zignur and the gypsies, had appointed places for periodical meetings. From time to time, their leaders conferred together. In the 17th century, they had 4 principal points of rendezvous. One in Spain, the Pass of Pangarbo, one in Germany, the glade called the Wicked Woman near Diekirch, where there are 2 enigmatic bas-reliefs representing a woman with a head and a man without one. One in France, the hill where was the colossal statue of Mas les Pommes, in the old sacred wood of Borvo Tomona, near Bonbon-les-Bains. One in England, behind the garden wall of William Challoner, Squire of Gisborough in Cleveland, Yorkshire, behind the square tower and the great wing which is entered by an arched door. End of 5. Okay, so the Comprachicos are not just like one, I mean, they're a group of people, but it's not like one country like owns the people. It's a group of people who have been cast out, the riffraff, as it was referred to, and they are just like a bunch of different nationalities coming together for a common, like, united under a common superstition, united under a common fanaticism. And they are honest in that they don't steal children. They go to people's homes, demand or ask for their children, and then pay them money in exchange. So it is an honest trade, which I don't like. And Victor Hugo says, like, yeah, like in these countries now, like you get whispers of rumors about the comprachicos. Like in this one part, you'll get like people saying, like, you better behave, otherwise I'm gonna call the comprachico, which is, I don't like that threat at all. The comprachicos, I don't like. I know you're not supposed to, but let it be stated that I don't like them. One more. We'll do one more chapter. 6. The laws against vagabonds have always been very rigorous in England. England, in her Gothic legislation, seemed to be inspired with this principle. Homo errans fere errante peior. One of the special statutes classifies the man without a home as more dangerous than the asp, dragon, lynx, or basilisk. For a long time England troubled herself as much concerning the gypsies, of whom she wished to be rid, as about the wolves, of which she has been cleared. In that the Englishman differed from the Irishman, who prayed to the saints for the health of the wolf and called him my godfather. English law, nevertheless, in the same way as we have just seen, it tolerated the wolf tamed, domesticated, and become in some sort a dog, tolerated the regular vagabond, become in some sort a subject. It did not trouble itself about either the mountebank, or the travelling barber, or the quack doctor, or the peddler, or the open-air scholar, as long as they had a trade to live by. Further than this, and with these exceptions, the description of freedom which exists in The Wanderer terrified the law. A tramp was a possible public enemy. That modern thing, the lounger, was then unknown. That ancient thing, the vagrant, was alone understood. A suspicious appearance, that indescribable something which all understand and none can define, was sufficient reason that society would take a man by the collar. Where do you live? How do you get your living? And if he could not answer, harsh penalties awaited him. Iron and fire were in the code. The law practiced the cauterization of vagrancy. Hence, throughout England, English territory, a veritable, I don't know what this means, loi de suspects, was applicable to vagrants, who, it must be owned, readily became malefactors, and particularly to gypsies, whose expulsion has erroneously been compared to the expulsion of the Jews and the Moors from Spain, and the Protestants from France. As for us, we do not confound a battu with a prosecution. The comprachicos, we insist, had nothing in common with the gypsies. The gypsies were a nation, the comprachicos were a compound of all nations, the lees of a horrible vessel full of filthy water. The comprachicos had not, like the gypsies, an idiom of their own. Their jargon was a promiscuous collection of idioms. All languages were mixed together in their language. They spoke a medley. Like the gypsies, they had come to be a people winding through the peoples, but their common tie was association, not race. At all epochs in history one finds in the vast liquid mass which constitutes humanity some of these streams of venomous men exuding poison around them. The gypsies were a tribe, the comprachicos a free masonry, a masonry having not a noble aim but a hideous handicraft. Finally, their religions differ. The gypsies were pagans, the comprachicos were Christians, and more than that, good Christians, as became an association which, although a mixture of all nations, owed its birth to Spain, a devout land. They were more than Christians. They were Catholics. They were more than Catholics. They were Romans, and so touchy in their faith and so pure that they refused to associate with the Hungarian nomads of the comitate of Pest, commanded and led by an old man having for scepter a wand and a silver ball surmounted by the double-headed Austrian eagle. It is true that these Hungarians were schismatics to the extent of celebrating the Assumption on the 29th August, which is an abomination. In England, so long as the Stuarts reigned, the confederation of the Comprachicos was, for motives of which we have already given you a glimpse, to a certain extent protected. James II, a devout man who persecuted Jewish folks and trampled out the gypsies, was a good prince to the Comprachicos. We have seen why. The Comprachicos were buyers of the human wares in which he was dealer. They excelled in disappearances. Disappearances are occasionally necessary for the good of the state. An inconvenient heir of tender age, whom they took and handled, lost his shape. This facilitated confiscation. The transfer of titles to favorites was simplified. The Comprachicos were, moreover, very discreet and very taciturn. They bound themselves to silence and kept their word, which is necessary in affairs of state. There was scarcely an example of their having betrayed the secrets of the king. This was, it is true, for their interest, and if the king had lost confidence in them, they would have been in great danger. They were thus of use in a political point of view. Moreover, these artists furnished singers for the Holy Father. The Comprachicos were useful for the Miserere of Allegri. They were particularly devout to Mary. All this pleased the papistry of the Stuarts. James II could not be hostile to holy men who pushed their devotion to the Virgin to the extent of manufacturing eunuchs. In 1688, there was a change of dynasty in England. Orange supplanted Stuart. William III replaced James II. James II went away to die in exile. Miracles were performed on his tomb, and his relics cured the Bishop of Autun of fistula, a worthy recompense of the Christian virtues of the prince. William, having neither the same ideas nor the same practices as James, was severe to the Comprachicos. He did his best to crush out the vermin. A statute of the early part of William and Mary's reign hit the association of child buyers hard. Okay, so James II was king at the time, and he sort of like turned his head away for the Comprachicos and actually used their skills a lot. And he went away to die and has been replaced now by William III. And William III is like, no, we're not going to have child buyers. We're not going to do that. We're going to crack down on this. Thank you. But I feel like that's it still might get worse. Oh, it will get worse. It was the blow of the club to the Comprachicos, who were from that time pulverized. By the terms of this statute, those of the fellowship taken and duly convicted were to be branded with a red-hot iron, imprinting R on the shoulder, signifying rogue, on the left hand T, signifying thief, and on the right hand M, signifying manslayer. The chiefs, supposed to be rich, although beggars in appearance, were to be punished in the calistrigium, that is, the pillory, and branded on the forehead with a P, besides having their goods confiscated and the trees in their woods rooted up. Those who did not inform against the Comprachicos were to be punished by confiscation and imprisonment for life. As for the crime of misprison, as for the women found among these men, they were to suffer the cucking stool. That sounds super like I don't want that. This is a tumbril, the name of which is composed of the French word coquine and the German stool. English law being endowed with a strange longevity, this punishment still exists in English legislation for quarrelsome women. The cucking stool is suspended over a river or a pond, the woman seated on it. The chair is allowed to drop into the water and then pulled out. This dipping of the woman is repeated 3 times to cool her anger, says the commentator, Chamberlain. I don't think that would cool my anger, like at all. That's the end of that section, and also the end of the like pre-chapters, because we are about to start. Oh, you can't see that at all. But we're about to start part 1, which we're gonna start next time. So everything is upsetting, and everything I hate has happened so far. It's wild, but it is a good introduction into what the story is coming into. We get the politics, we get the religion, we get the horrors of the comprachicos and the disfigurement and the use of amusement for like highborns amusement. I worded that weird and couldn't figure out how to get out of it. And it's terrible. And we also get the knowledge that royals are able to basically just do whatever they want to do, and there's little to no punishment. They make, so much money, and people are really struggling to make money. And the people who don't even have jobs are subject to being punished for it, which is terrible. This book is intense. Very intense. So intense. I really like the writing. I really like some of the phrases that we had, that Victor Hugo has just like sprinkled in. And yeah, this time period, this world sucks. There's not anything good about it. And that is awful. And I guess we'll just have to wait and see like what actually happens. So yeah, we'll pick up right where we left off. We are about to start part 1. So we did all of the like introductory stuff, and now we're like getting into it. And we're like 6% into the book. So like I said, it's a long one, but shorter than Don Quixote. So there's always that. So yeah, that's gonna be it for tonight. We will pick up next week, right? Yes. What day is it? Yes. We'll pick up next week right where we left off. I hope you all have a great night. I hope you all have a great weekend. As always, whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate you, and I 1000% appreciate your support. So thank you all so much. I will catch you next time. Bye.